At exactly 4:13 a.m. in the black water of the Western Pacific, radar operators aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier noticed something that should not have been there. One contact became 3. 3 became 9. Then the screen began to bloom with moving shapes from every direction. Within seconds, the calm rhythm inside the carrier's combat information center was gone. Someone whispered the word no sailor on an open sea ever wants to hear. Surrounded. Far from the coastline, in waters that looked empty to the naked eye, a full American carrier strike group had been cutting through the night in disciplined formation. The carrier sat at the center like a floating air base, a city of steel and firepower, displacing nearly 100,000 tons. Around her, guided missile destroyers and cruisers guarded the perimeter. Beneath the surface, somewhere unseen, friendly submarines moved in silence. Overhead, airborne early warning aircraft extended the fleet's vision far beyond the horizon. On paper, it was one of the most heavily defended formations on Earth. And yet before dawn, it suddenly looked vulnerable. The sea was flat that night. The moon was thin. Visibility was poor. The kind of darkness sailors respect because it hides distance, direction, and intention. The carrier's bridge had been quiet except for the usual low voices, the glow of consoles, and the constant stream of status updates. Flight operations were paused. Most of the air wing was secured on deck or below. The crew was not asleep, but the ship was in that tense in-between state that warships know well. Never relaxed, never fully at battle stations, always one message away from chaos. Then, the contacts kept coming. At first they looked small, too small to be major combatants. That was what made them strange. Fast-moving surface tracks began appearing from the north, then the west, then the southeast, converging in loose arcs. Not a fleet formation, not commercial traffic either. They were maneuvering with purpose. What the crew didn't realize in those first moments was that this was not just a navigation anomaly. It was a test, a message, and potentially the opening move in something much larger. Inside the carrier's command center, officers began checking every layer of the battle space. Surface radar, electronic emissions, air tracks, sonar reports from escorts, intelligence overlays. The picture was messy. Some of the approaching vessels were emitting no obvious signals. In others were broadcasting ambiguous identification. A few seemed to appear, disappear, and reappear as sea clutter and weather played tricks on the sensors. But one fact became impossible to ignore. They were closing the distance. A U.S. aircraft carrier is not a lone predator roaming the ocean. It is the centerpiece of a networked machine. Every escort ship, every helicopter, every E-2D Hawkeye in the air, every FA-18 on alert, every sonar buoy, every encrypted data link exists to prevent exactly this kind of surprise. So when unknown vessels managed to press inward from several directions at once, the question was immediate and alarming. Was this an accident, a provocation, or the first layer of a coordinated attack? Then something unexpected happened. A destroyer on the outer screen reported intermittent sonar activity. Faint. Irregular. But enough to freeze the room. It was not confirmed, not yet. Could have been biologics, could have been shipping noise, could have been nothing. But in a high-tension maritime environment, vague underwater signatures change everything. Surface contacts are one danger. Surface contacts combined with a possible submarine threat are something else entirely. Because while the world watches missiles and fighter jets, navies still fear the same ancient killer, the unseen weapon from below. That is the paradox of the aircraft carrier. It is the most visible symbol of national power, but its greatest enemy is often invisible. A submarine does not need to defeat the entire strike group. It only needs one opening, one blind spot, one mistake in spacing timing, or detection. A wake-homing torpedo in the right place can change the balance of a crisis in minutes. Now the carrier group had two problems at once. Unknown boats were tightening above the surface, and something might be stalking below. The order went out quickly. Raise readiness, launch reconnaissance, prepare combat air patrol. On the flight deck, crews rushed under red lights, moving with practice speed. Within minutes, the first fighters were being armed and fueled. Helicopters configured for anti-submarine warfare spun to life, carrying dipping sonar and torpedoes of their own. A Hawkeye was pushed to launch, its great radar dome ready to pull the horizon farther back. Above the sea, the carrier was about to build a dome of awareness. But those minutes mattered, and the vessels outside were using every second. By now, the visual confirmation was coming in. Fast attack craft. Some larger patrol vessels, others little more than armed speedboats cutting hard through the dark water, fanning out, then regrouping. They were not firing. Not yet. But they were doing something almost as dangerous. They were compressing space. They were turning maneuver room into friction. They were forcing the carrier group to respond, to signal intentions, to reveal posture and thresholds. This was the real danger. Not always the first missile. Sometimes the danger is the moment before it, when both sides crowd the line between intimidation and war. And everyone knows one error can trigger a chain nobody can stop. But what happened next shocked everyone on the bridge. One of the approaching vessels altered course abruptly and cut closer than expected, crossing into a range where miscalculation became deadly. Warning calls were transmitted. No response. Another escort began illuminating targets more aggressively with fire control systems, not locking to shoot, but making a point. A helicopter moved outward to observe. Then electronic warfare operators aboard the strike group noticed something new. Emissions spiking from multiple directions at once, brief but deliberate, as if the ships outside were probing radar frequencies, communications patterns, reaction times. This was no random swarm. The commanders aboard the carrier now faced the oldest and hardest decision in naval warfare. If you overreact, you can ignite a battle. If you underreact, you can invite one. Meanwhile, every second of hesitation tells the other side something about your rules, your discipline, and your fear. Above the carrier, the first fighters roared into the darkness. Their afterburners lit the deck edge for a split second, then vanished into the night sky. Soon the air picture began to stabilize. The Hawkeye started painting a wider map. From altitude, the pattern became clearer. The vessels were not simply surrounding the carrier, they were shaping a box around it while leaving narrow gaps, funnel points, predictable movement channels. Any major course correction by the American formation would have to pass through carefully observed sectors. That was the big mistake. Whoever planned the encirclement seemed to believe a carrier was just a larger ship, a bigger target, a heavyweight that could be crowded, contained, and psychologically pressured. But a U.S. aircraft carrier is not just a ship. It is a moving command node linked to submarines, satellites, aircraft, destroyers, cyber systems, and strike weapons spread across hundreds of miles. Surrounding the visible center does not mean you control the battle space. In fact, it may mean you have moved directly into it. And still, the most dangerous part had not even begun. The sonar contact returned. This time it was stronger, long enough for the escorting destroyer to classify it as a probable submarine transient. The report moved through the strike group instantly. The carrier itself did not maneuver wildly. That would only create confusion. Instead, the formation subtly shifted. One escort widened, another tightened. Helicopters pushed outward and began laying an invisible underwater net, dipping sonar into black water, listening for machinery, cavitation, and any sign of metal and intent beneath the waves. On the carrier, many sailors still did not know the full picture. They only knew the ship had changed posture. Doors were secured. Watch teams expanded. Weapons crews stood ready. Pilots received updates in clipped voices. Somewhere below deck, young sailors who had joined to see the world now sat very still, listening to the vibrations of the ship, aware that thousands of tons of steel can still feel fragile when the ocean turns uncertain. Then came the moment every commander fears. One of the outer destroyers reported a possible torpedo track. It was not yet confirmed, but even the possibility altered the entire crisis. Countermeasure systems were readied. Helicopters turned sharply. Sonar operators locked in. Seconds stretched. On the bridge, nobody spoke more than necessary. If a torpedo had truly entered the water, then the swarm on the surface might only have been bait, a distraction to pin the strike group while an underwater platform crept into lethal range. Within seconds, everything changed. The supposed torpedo track began to behave strangely. Its speed profile didn't match. Its acoustic character was inconsistent. Then the assessment shifted. False contact. Probably decoy noise. Maybe deliberate. Maybe environmental. Relief did not come. If anything, the room grew colder, because now it looked even more like a coordinated operation designed not just to threaten the carrier, but to overload judgment itself. Surface pressure, electronic probing, undersea uncertainty forced the Americans to react to 10 problems at once, and maybe one real opening appears. Tuite 10. But the Americans had one advantage the encircling vessels did not fully appreciate. Time favored the side with layered systems and disciplined doctrine. The longer the standoff lasted without a shot being fired, the more the carrier strike group could expand its awareness and options. Now the fighters were overhead. The Hawkeye was feeding a clearer picture. Additional patrol aircraft from farther away were moving into support. A submarine somewhere below was likely repositioning. Missile systems aboard the escorts were active but silent. Every unknown vessel on the sea was now being tracked, classified, and watched from above, beside, and possibly below. The circle around the carrier had not disappeared, but it had been inverted. The hunters were being mapped by the thing they thought they had trapped. Then something unexpected happened again. The lead vessels in the swarm began to hesitate. Their course changes became smaller. Their spacing widened. A few started drifting outward, almost imperceptibly at first, as if testing whether the Americans would chase, warn again, or hold formation. That hesitation said everything. The dramatic encirclement had produced its image, but not its objective. The carrier had not panicked. It had not broken formation. It had not fired blindly. It had not surrendered initiative. Instead, it had turned the crisis into a layered surveillance and control problem. Exactly the kind of contest it was built to survive. One destroyer accelerated slightly and repositioned to close a seam. A helicopter hovered just far enough to remind the smaller craft they were seen in detail. Far above, fighters traced invisible circles of dominance. No missiles launched, no guns opened up. But now every vessel outside understood a hard truth. If this escalated, they would be fighting not a surrounded ship, but an entire kill chain. That is the part most people never see when they imagine naval power. Not just explosions, not just dogfights, not just dramatic missile streaks over water, but the invisible architecture of pressure. Detection before destruction, position before firing, the battle to control information before anyone dares control the sea. As dawn began to thin the darkness, the geometry of the encounter changed for good. Sunlight is unforgiving. It strips away some of the ambiguity the night provides. Hulls became more visible, wakes more obvious, distances easier to judge, and with visibility came a new reality. The swarm that had looked so menacing in the dark now looked exposed, Small vessels on open water, limited endurance, limited protection, limited room for error. One by one, they began pulling back. Not fast, not in panic, just enough to signal that the moment had passed. The encirclement loosened. The pressure faded. The underwater contact never reappeared with confidence. The fighters remained on station. The carrier kept moving. And the sea, which had seemed ready to erupt hours earlier, returned to that strange military calm that feels less like peace and more like an agreement to wait. So what actually happened out there? Officially, perhaps very little. A dangerous encounter, aggressive maneuvering, elevated readiness, no confirmed shots fired, no publicly acknowledged damage, no cinematic explosion for headlines. But in another sense, a great deal happened. A carrier strike group was tested in one of the most psychologically charged ways possible. Not by immediate attack, but by orchestrated compression, by proximity, by engineered ambiguity. And the response mattered because in modern naval competition, perception is often the first battlefield. For the crews involved, the lesson was unforgettable. It is one thing to read about anti-access strategy, maritime swarms, submarine threats, and escalation ladders in a briefing room. It is another to watch unknown contacts close in across a dark sea while sonar pings whisper uncertainty from below. It is another to know that a single nervous decision, one burst of gunfire, one misread maneuver, could light up an entire region by sunrise. And for the side that chose to surround that carrier, the lesson may have been even sharper. Intimidation works best against forces that do not know themselves, against disorganized opponents, against brittle command chains. But surrounding a U.S. carrier at sea is not the same as cornering a single warship. It means entering the defensive web of one of the most complex combat systems ever built. It means getting close enough to threaten, yes, but also close enough to be tracked, categorized, targeted, and remembered. That is why the real story is not that a carrier was surrounded. It is that the people who did it may have mistaken presence for power and proximity for control. Out on the ocean, those are not the same thing, because the sea has always rewarded patience over theater, discipline over noise, and layered strategy over dramatic gestures. In the end, no missile had to fly for the message to become clear. The circle around the carrier was real. The danger was real. The risk of war was terrifyingly real, but the big mistake was assuming that surrounding the symbol of American naval power meant neutralizing it. As the sun finally rose over the Pacific, the carrier kept moving forward, cutting the water with the same cold confidence it had before the first contact ever appeared. Jets remained armed. Sonar teams remained alert. Commanders kept scanning the horizon because what happened next in such encounters is never guaranteed. Another swarm, another decoy, another submarine, another crisis hiding just beyond radar range. And that is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of modern naval warfare. Sometimes the battle is not fought with torpedoes or missiles, and sometimes it is fought in the dark, in the silence before dawn, in the minds of commanders forced to decide what is signal, what is bait, and what is the first move of a war nobody wants. At 4:13 a.m., a U.S. aircraft carrier was suddenly surrounded at sea. By sunrise, everyone involved understood the same thing. Getting that close was not a show of control. It was a very dangerous mistake.